Good morning and happy Saturday. It is Saturday, April 4th, 2020, and we are in the midst of hunkering down, social distancing, staying at home with our own household, and my house is quiet except for these dogs who might bark a little bit once in a while, but the kids are still sleeping, and I'm doing a typical Saturday morning thing for me, which is brewing kombucha. I do it a lot. I started brewing kombucha probably maybe even 5 years ago with Shannon, who taught a class for Seldovia Village Tribe, who I work for, and I had never been introduced to kombucha until we moved to Seldovia, and I didn't know what it was, didn't know you could buy it in the grocery store, didn't know you could make it at home. But like many things, I decided I was gonna try it and step outside my comfort zone, and found out that I really like kombucha. It's a fermented tea drink, so it is made with tea, and I'll show you what I use here in just a second. And something called a Scobie. Some people call it a mushroom. And Scobie is all capital letters, S-C-O-B-Y, and it stands for a symbiotic colony of bacteria and yeast, which the bacteria might sound kind of yuck, but as you probably know, our stomach has good and bad bacteria in it, and so the Scobie is actually part of what makes this drink turn from a sweet tea to a fermented tea. And it does feed on the sugar that we're going to put in here, as you will see. And so the sugar content, while it looks like it's a lot when you put it in the bottle to start it, it's not going to be a lot of sugar at the end because the Scobie feeds on it, and the Scobie is going to grow from the sugar. So if you've ever made something like Amish friendship bread or sourdough or something that has a starter and you use part of it to start the next batch, that's exactly what we're doing with kombucha. It's the same process of starting with something and then making something new and adding some of the old to the new to create another batch. And so that's why I said it's been going on in our house for years. There might have been a couple times that I've thrown a bunch of Scobies into one jar and let it sit for a while, and that's what they call making a Scobie hotel. When you don't want to get rid of your Scobies, you don't want to lose them, but you're not ready to brew 4,000 more jars. I brew a gallon or two at a time, and a gallon jar makes about 7 small bottles. And you'll see when I go to pour these off what I'm talking about a little bit better. So I use 2 different kinds of tea. I use green tea and I use a regular black tea. I'm going to use, just so you know the proportions of what I do, I'm going to use 4 black teas to 2 green teas. And these have a few in them at a time, but I do 4 and 2. So there we go. There's my 4 black teas, and then inside here, I don't know how many's in there. There's 4 in here, so I'll take 2 of them out and leave 2 for my other batch. The other ingredients, there's my stand if I ever decide to put my phone on it. The other things that I need in order to do this, I have this bowl, which is what I'm gonna use to put the Scobies in. I'm gonna use these tongs that are rubber tipped tongs, and I'm gonna try and not let the metal part get inside there, because the reaction of metal is not good with the Scobie. So I'm trying to use rubber as possible, and when I stir, I'm going to use this this hard plastic spoon. I have a measuring cup here with a good spout on it for when I pour out my drinks, and of course this funnel, and this funnel actually has a nice little strainer in it so that when I put it in the bottles, and I pour it in any of the floaty stuff, which here we go. Here's some kombucha, and there's a Scobie, which you'll see a little more up close in a little bit. Here are my bottles that I use. I have a collection of lids. And these bottles, by the way, are from kombucha that I bought at the store, drank and saved, and or friends like Michael Opheim and Sharon Bond had saved jars or bottles and given them to me. But I also set out a plain ball jar because you can bottle it in anything. In fact, these bottles, these gallon jugs, once you take the Scobie out, if you don't want to bottle it into individual portions, you can take the Scobie out and you can put a lid on it and stick it in your fridge and pour it from the bottle if you so desire. The other thing I have here is organic sugar. I don't know if it makes a huge difference, and I've certainly had to use regular non-organic sugar, but I do prefer to use organic sugar because that's what I was told, and I think it's better anyway. And this is my drink station over here. Hey, there's my coffee waiting for me. I have one of these hot water pots, and I'm gonna get it going right now because that's one of the first things we're gonna need to brew the next batch is some hot water. And you're gonna make this, sorry, my kitchen here. You're gonna make this with hot water in a jar and basically just be making some sweet tea. And I put it in here, and then I pour about a cup of the liquid that's in this jar in here with the Scobie in a minute, because that's going to be that starter that I talked about that's going to go into the next batch. So I have to actually pour these into bottles so that I have an empty glass jar, because I don't currently have an empty glass jar. So I'm going to reuse this jar. And if you're going from one batch to the next batch, you do not want to use soap and water in between. So when you've poured all of this into all of these bottles, you want to just rinse the jar real quickly, and then you're going to brew your next batch of tea. So I'm going to go ahead and do some bottling here, and I wanted to show you something else. I have dates on it. I use a coffee filter and a rubber band on the top, and then I put a piece of clear tape across the top and I write on it with a permanent marker. That's how I know how long it's been since I started that brew. This one right here, the date on it was March 11th. And I usually like to do closer to 3 weeks between bottling and brewing the next batch. But I'm gonna take you into my pantry here. And inside my pantry, I have 1, 2, 3 more jars to go. So I'm constantly brewing kombucha. Here's my little setup with the, I've got a permanent marker, my coffee filters, and my tape for labeling. This is actually apple cider vinegar, homemade apple cider vinegar that we made. And my shot glass, I do not drink alcohol anymore. Many years ago I gave that up, but I had to get a shot glass from someone so that I can do shots of my apple cider vinegar, because also it is another good fermented thing and works really well. So, all right, I'm gonna do a little bit of bottling and then we'll come back. To just show you this, I just poured kombucha from my jar into here so that I can pour it into the bottles, and you'll see that it does foam up a little bit, and this is kind of a tricky part to do this one-handed because I don't want my funnel to go tipping sideways, but these bottles are roughly about 2 cups, and what I'm pouring from is a 4-cup measuring cup, so I got to be paying attention or I'm going to spill. I do spill, it just kind of happens, and you'll see that it does get a foam head on it, and that's the carbonation that comes with this when you do it. And if you like it more carbonated, you can actually add fruit, you can add ginger, I'm trying to think what else people use, but you can add those things to it and then cap it and leave it on your counter for another few days, 3 or 4 more days, and the kombucha will feed off of the sugar from the fruit, and it will actually make it more fizzy, and then you can refrigerate it. Normally after I do this, so this bottle right now is ready to be capped and put in the refrigerator, and I can drink this whenever I'm ready. But if I decide I want it fizzier, I can add some blueberries, some raspberries right to the top of this, and then leave it on my counter for 3 or 4 more days, and then put it in the refrigerator. So I know if you're from Seldovia, you probably still have some blueberries, some raspberries, some salmon berries in your freezer, and you can add those right into this, right? Leave yourself a little headspace there to add some fruit, and then set it on the counter for a couple days. It gives it a nice fruity flavor. And I've heard a lot of different add-ins that people do, so if you guys want to tell me what you add in, that would be great. I'm going to go ahead and finish the bottling process so that I've got an empty jar to show you how to do the rest. Okay, so I've bottled most of these. Now you'll see that this made 6.5, and then I added liquid to the Scobie. So this is what's going to get poured into the jar after the tea is made and completely cooled. One of the things that you'll notice when we do this, okay, so this jar is empty. I did just rinse it out. Like I said, you don't want to use soap and water on this because you don't want that introduced into what you're doing. And you just rinse this with a little water and it comes out really nice and clean. So the next thing I'm going to do is put the 6 tea bags in here. I'm going to put 4 of the black and 2 of the green, and I'm also going to add 1 cup of the organic sugar, so that when I pour the hot water in, it is going to dissolve that sugar in with the tea bags, and it's going to steep for 10 minutes. If you steep it longer than that, it's not the end of the world, but we really don't want to steep it for forever, because if you steep it for too long, the tea gets kind of bitter. So 10 minutes, I usually do set a timer so that I don't forget about it when I go back to doing whatever else I'm doing that's keeping me busy. So I'm going to go ahead and set that up, and I'll be right back. Okay, so I've got 6 tea bags in there and a cup of the organic sugar, and I do pull off these little tabs on the end of my tea bags. I take everything apart and I take these off so that they're not soaking in there. I don't know that it makes any difference whatsoever, but that's just me. That's what I like to do. And see, my water is boiling right now, so I'm gonna grab that. I'm gonna come back over here, and here's what I think is important to note. This thing only does 1 liter of water at a time before it's boiling over. So what I think is kind of interesting to note is look at how much that is in your gallon jar. You don't want to fill this whole thing up with hot water, and this is where I'm using my plastic spoon. You want to give it a stir to stir up and help dissolve that sugar in there, and then you're going to set your timer for 10 minutes, or you're going to eyeball it. And I just leave my spoon resting on top because I'm going to use that, and I do use a slotted spoon so that when I go to get the tea bags out, I can fish them out pretty easily and not lose too much of my liquid. But the reason this is as much as I want to do is because the mixture needs to be, the tea needs to be cool by the time that I add the Scobie and the liquid back into it. So if you look at the color of that, how dark that is, and then you look at the amber color of a completed bottle, it's a lot lighter. So you're gonna have your concentrated tea here, and you're gonna fill it to, and this is sort of my marker, is whenever you have a big gallon jar, there's usually like a turning point here where the bottle starts to bend. And this is where I fill the water up. And I use cold water after my 10 minutes, and I fish out my after I fish out my tea bags, I fill it with cold water to like where the bend is, because I have to have enough room to put my Scobie and the liquid back in there, and I don't want it, you know, overflowing. So I kind of eyeball it, and that's sort of the marker that I use of where I stop the cold water. So I'm going to go ahead and move on to the next step, which right now I'm in the process of just letting this sit and steep for 10 minutes. I have another one to bottle. I have all of these to cap and put in the refrigerator. And notice they are on paper towels. I told you that I am not always able to do this without little spills and drips. The paper towels just help protect my counter a little bit. I still have to wipe it all down when I'm done. I am going to take out the next Scobie and show it to you, because it's definitely a bigger Scobie, and I'm going to put on some gloves so that I can show you how to separate a Scobie, because that's kind of a concept that you need to know, because once you start doing this, you're going to have an overgrowth of Scobies, and you're going to have friends that want to have kombucha too, and you're going to be sharing your Scobies. I do it all the time. Just gave one of my friends, Michael Opheim, who also does kombucha. Michael gave me half of these bottles, but his Scobie died, and that can happen. They can get moldy. I have so far not had that happen, but doesn't mean it isn't going to happen at some point. So if a Scobie gets moldy, which I think probably happens more if you're not doing much with them, if you're letting them go dormant. But if that happens, it's not the end of the world. You just start over. And since I haven't experienced it yet, I'm not sure what it's going to look like, but I'm pretty sure that I will know if something is out of the ordinary. And this is not pretty stuff to begin with. It looks weird. I mean, and I'm just going to be honest, the first time I saw it, I thought this is disgusting. But it really, it's a neat concept, and I think it's definitely helped my gut health. Certainly, I believe it has helped my immunity, and I think it's just an important thing to be taking care of our gut bacteria during this time. Okay, so here's what the Scobie looks like, just looking down at it from inside the jar. And when you look at it on the side, you can see like there are layers, okay? And it is kind of a strange thing. And mine looks pretty wrecked because, once again, I've been peeling it apart for friends. And you can see that there's, you know, it's been kind of torn and shredded. And that is kind of the way it looks. It adds a layer each time you do this. So here's the fun part. Try not to spill it all over your counter. 1, 2, 3, jump it into my jar here. And so I've got gloves on now. I'm gonna kind of just pick it up and show you that there's a layer. See, you can see this is like another layer. This is a thin coating, and this is kind of what grows each time as you get this thin layer. But over time, this can get really, really, really thick if you're not messing with it. And I mess with mine kind of more than I probably should, maybe, but that's just because I have people in my life who know that I am doing kombucha and are asking for me to share Scobie with them. So I do what I can, and look, see now, this is hard to do, hold and show. It looks really gross. I mean, I know it does. But you can pull this apart, and you really don't have to have a ton of it. I think when I did this with Sharon, she was trying to, you know, kind of pull apart Scobies so that people could have some. And I believe she actually used kitchen shears and cut a Scobie like just right in half. I'm a little scared. There, look, there's a piece. And here's another piece, and I can pull these pieces apart. Here, I'm just gonna keep pulling it apart. I'm gonna actually end up throwing this all back into the next jar, no big deal. But showing you how easily, like with your hands, it's a lot easier with a glove on to separate this than it is to hold it up in the air. Sorry, I guess I lost. I'm trying to watch and video at the same time. It's hard to kind of figure out what you're doing with this with just your kitchen tongs. I mean, I have tried to kind of just shake one from the other and it doesn't work so well. But if you can get your hands in there with the glove on, you can really pull this apart very easily. It's just a much simpler process doing it this way. So now if I really wanted to share with a neighbor or a friend, this really doesn't look like a lot, but this will grow. This will grow into something more. I usually try and give them something that looks like a whole layer, but if you can see how thick this chunk is, look at that. This is much thicker. And this was, you know, this edge piece is really thick. And I can just feel, if I hadn't messed with this, this would just be a thick layer. This is thick too, and then this top piece is really thick. And so I can keep separating it out, but that's my good chunk right there. That's a nice, hefty, thick piece. But all of this is gonna go into 2 batches, because this is the 2 Scobies from the 2 batches that I just did. Now I need to add a little more liquid. You really want to do a 1/2 cup to a cup of reserved liquid from the last batch, and that's going to go into your next jar for brewing. So I'm going to go wash my hands because they've been in all of this, and bottle up the rest, and then we'll come back for finishing off. Remember when I mentioned that my funnel had a strainer in it? This is why. See these floaty things? That's little bits and pieces of the kombucha that kind of separate, or from the Scobie that kind of separate, and they are totally fine to drink. They kind of probably feel like an oyster going down, but if that kind of stuff bothers you, the strainer is really nice for just giving you a clear liquid. So I'm gonna finish bottling. I just wanted to show you that because it's kind of one of those things that if you're not used to it, you might kind of go, is this okay? But yeah, it's okay. It's what it's supposed to do. I need to cap all of these, but I'm going to put some fruit in the top of some of them. I left a little more head space in some of them. So I'll probably put about 1/2 of these on the counter to do some brewing. And you can see how many, this ended up being 2 jars worth. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. It really is almost 14. It's almost 7 usually. It really depends on how much of the excess liquid I reserve. It really depends on how full I make the jars. If I'm giving a little extra head space, like this one's really full, but some of these are a lot less full. And so it really just kind of depends. It usually ends up being between 12 and 14 jars that I fill up from 2 gallons. So 6 or 7 per gallon is what I typically come out with. And I'm setting up for my next one. I gotta put some sugar in there. I've got my water getting warming up and getting ready to boil so that I can start my next jar. So I'm gonna stop and tidy up in here a little bit and we'll finish up. Okay, I've got some salmon berries left from August of 19. I'm gonna go start dropping some of those in and getting those ready to sit on the counter. And like I said, I'll leave them sitting on the counter for about 3-4 days, and then they'll get refrigerated. So in the meantime, the ones with the caps on them right now are getting ready to go in the fridge. Okay, we're at the final stage of our process. So I have my second jar that's steeping right now, and I have this jar that's ready to add the Scobie. When I topped it off with water, remember I said cold water. So it's important that this water in here is cold mixed with the hot at the bottom. You don't want it to be hot because it will kill the Scobie. So that's the big thing that you need to remember. Okay, and then here comes the fun part, trying to not make a huge mess by adding about half of this Scobie. And remember that I tore this thing to shreds, so who knows what I'm gonna grab here. I'm gonna probably have to do this in pieces because I wanna save enough of this for the other piece. That looks good to me. These two pieces together will make a good amount. Oh, well, if I can not lose it. Okay, and again, I'm trying to just get some of this liquid off so I'm not making a huge mess. There's almost no way to do this without making a little mess. And then I'm gonna pour some of this liquid, without pouring the rest of the Scobie in, I'm gonna pour some of this liquid in. And I am totally eyeballing this. You can tell there's no precise measurement here. And now the Scobie I have left is sitting in a decent amount of liquid. So when I go to finish off this jar, I'm just gonna dump this in. I don't have to use the tongs, but because I had both of them in the same jar, that's what I do. Now at this point, you'll see there's a little bit of head space, and if I really wanted to, I guess I could top it off with a little more water. I don't stir it usually at this point, but if I feel like I didn't put enough water in and wanted to add a little more, I might give it a stir. But at this point, this is when I put the coffee filter and rubber band on and I label it. So I'm gonna label this and show you where it's going next. All right, so I've put the coffee filter on with a rubber band. It has to be able to breathe. Some people use cheesecloth, and cheesecloth is totally fine. Cheesecloth is good. I like to just use this because I found that this was easy. Coffee filters are so cheap and they're great for a lot of projects, and so I just have coffee filters. And then like I said, I do use a piece of clear tape. I didn't write directly on the coffee filter because otherwise it would have bled. So I stick a piece of tape on there and then I write on it with a permanent marker. And then it's going into my pantry. Okay, here we are in my pantry, and I have one labeled 319, 323, and 328. So this one is 4-4, and just like with anything that you do first in, first out. And so this is the next bottle that I'm going to brew. And so pretty much every Saturday, this is what I do. Now, Rob just left on Tuesday, so I don't have two kombucha drinkers in the house. I only have myself, and this is a lot of kombucha. I only drink kombucha once a day. And here are my ones that I added the salmon berries to. So these guys will sit on the counter for a few more days before they go and get put away. So what I will do in the future, today I made 2 gallons with all of that Scobie, but what I could have done, probably what I should have done, is not made another thing of tea, and I could have thrown all of this Scobie and liquid in with the one I just put in the jar, and that would actually create what people refer to as a Scobie hotel, where you start getting more and more and more Scobie, and it becomes less liquid in there because there's more Scobie in there. The other thing you can do is continuous brew, and I have not had success with continuous brew, so I'm not the authority to tell you how to do that. So I'll just say a quick goodbye, and I got to get out of the bright sunshine, which is a wonderful thing that in April we have bright sunshine. Anyway, I hope you guys enjoyed this. I know it's kind of lengthy going through it step by step and not together in the kitchen, but I hope that you guys enjoyed learning how to do this, and hopefully that was instructional enough that you guys could follow and it made sense. And if you have any questions, you can always put something in the comments, or you guys can call me. You can call me at the office, 907-435-3252, and I would be happy to walk you through it and just talk to you about how to do it. And if anybody needs a Scobie, you know where to go. Talk to you later. Bye-bye.